Knights of Labor started as secret society in 1869, the Noble and Holy Order of the Knights of Labor, for all skilled and unskilled labor, men and women, blacks and whites, focused on social and economic reform, not politics. Haymarket Square Bomb episode Seriously Weekend Nights. Early unions. National Labor Union 1866. 600,000 members. Skilled and unskilled laborers. No Chinese allowed. Little encouragement for women and blacks. Work for arbitration of industrial disputes and the 8-hour day. Won the 8-hour day for government workers. Colored National Labor Union. 1860 to 1890. 1866, National Labor Union is founded. 1877, Great Uprising of Railroad Workers begins in Martinsburg, Virginia. Molly Maguires, or Irish co-workers, hanged in Pennsylvania. 1882, first Labor Day celebrations take place. 1885, Knights of Labor founded in Chicago. And 1886, American Federation of Labor founded. The first president was Samuel Gompers. The history of the labor movement needs to be taught in every school in this land. America is a living testimonial to what free men and women, organized in free democratic trade unions, can do to make a better life. We ought to be proud of it. The American Federation of Labor was an association of trade unions representing skilled workers in many industries. By the end of the 19th century, the AFL was the dominant organization representing interests of skilled labor in the United States. The Wobblies followed the idea of industrial unionism, which meant that they embraced and accepted all sorts of unskilled and skilled workers. The union consisted of immigrants, people of color, women, and migrant farm workers. The Wobblies wanted to create one big union, through which the workers could control the means of production and distribution.
The early half of the 20th century saw a rapid rise in labor union membership, but today, only about 1/8 of American workers belong to them. What happened to the American Union? Labor unions began as a way for the common worker to achieve collective bargaining power against employers for higher wages, safer conditions, and better hours. Some unions, such as the Industrial Workers of the World, were focused not only on those goals, but also in creating a united working class. Others, known as bread and butter unions, were solely focused on achieving better conditions.
Picket lines around 100 plants.
A union's collective power was often enforced in the form of a strike, a practice still common today among public school teachers and transportation workers. Workers would band together and agree not to work until employers gave in to their demands. In the early days, these strikes could turn into violent riots. Today, most unions settle conditions directly with the companies. Through striking and negotiating, unions were able to achieve many victories for its workers. Today, sectors like public education and auto industries are heavily unionized, but many other private sector jobs no longer have a large union influence. One possible reason is government action. Certain labor laws have made unions seem less necessary. For instance, with passage of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, workers no longer needed to depend on unions to report unsafe conditions. Meanwhile, other laws have limited what unions can do. The Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 placed restrictions on certain union bargaining tactics, like striking. Many companies also offer benefits that were once traditionally brought about by unions, such as pension. The decline of unions may also be tied to larger changes in the global economy. Some industries have seen jobs move overseas or be replaced by automation. and with that came the loss of many unionized jobs. Attitudes towards unions may have also contributed to their decline. Many people began to think that unions were economically inefficient and that they hindered growth. And unionized labor that requires higher pay pushed companies to find work elsewhere to stay competitive. But that doesn't mean unions are no longer influential. Organized labor recently helped raise the stagnant minimum wage in several cities. Whether unions will disappear or make a comeback, their influence on the American workforce will carry on for years to come.
In the beginning.
We're all guilty of forgetting our roots, of forgetting where we came from.
Going to work before we had unions, 100 years ago, for example, wasn't anything like what it is like today.
Retail, workers put in 12 or 15-hour days.
Plants and factories were not safe. And there was no overtime.
And no mandatory breaks?
Basically, corporations could police themselves.
Hey, people didn't retire from jobs like these. They just stopped working.
It's pretty common for workers to lose an arm or a finger or a hand because there was no authority in place to enforce safety standards.
There's no calling in sick. Sick or not, you have to go to work.
Pension? Please, nobody got pensions. They're lucky enough to get a thank you.
Nobody had health insurance back then. It was either you're going to work at your own risk or you didn't work at all.
Come all of you good workers, good news to you I'll tell of how the good old Union
1888,
has come in here to dwell.
1897,
Meat Cutters Union first chartered.
1901,
Textile Workers first chartered.
1948,
Healthcare Workers targeted for organizing.
1976,
First woman elected Vice President of Meat Cutters Union.
1978,
Professional Division expands to include healthcare workers.
The Industrial Revolution was a major step forward for organized labor.
It was there that the country saw vast amounts of wealth begin to pile up with small groups of businessmen.
After the Industrial Revolution, the classes grew apart even more. There were more rich and more poor, and the disparity grew, and so there was a great need for the labor movement to bridge that gap.
And it introduced us to misery and experiences that we'd not known before in this country.
These guys, they relied on workforces in the hundreds to make products that made them richer than kings, and yet they shared almost none of it with the workers on the factory floor. Finally, people here and in Europe began to say enough is enough, and they started to form unions.
Labor delegates representing 16 million workers gather in New York for the history-making merger of the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. The merger is the culmination of 20 years of effort.
We realized early on, and the employers have now followed us, that putting together smaller entities into one big entity creates strength.
People talk about mergers as though they were invented by corporations to streamline efficiency. The fact is that organized labor deserves the credit for making mergers popular when smaller unions began joining forces with larger ones.
1979,
Meat cutters and retail clerks merge, forming the United Food and Commercial Workers.
1981,
In 1937, in an area near Detroit, Michigan, women took over through a sit-down strike a major retail corporation, Woolworths, Five and Dime. They did it on their own, and they, as a result, women became known as a real force in the labor movement.
There was no 8-hour day. There was no overtime pay. There was no vacation pay. There was no holiday pay. There were none of the things that you enjoy in a collective bargaining agreement until labor unions came along.
And that was the labor movement. That's why we have benefits at the workplace. That's why we have equality at the workplace. That's why we have certain rights that we never had before.
And I can assure you, if there weren't labor unions today to hold these employers' feet to the fire, those things would go away quickly.